Alrighty, everybody. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the beginnings here of the Cold War. The Cold War is a very, very touchy time period between the United States and Russia. Comes very, very, very close to World War III. And we're going to talk about today how close we came to everybody just being wiped out. Absolutely ridiculous. All right. So, we had talked about the Potsdam Conference yesterday, and this is a meeting. Clement, like, he's just really happy to be there. Truman and Stalin at the Potsdam Conference. All right. So, satellite nations is the term given to Russian-controlled countries, and I got an example here. So, from like 1949 to 1989. These are satellite nations. So let me clarify for this course, when we use them interchangeably, what the difference between the Soviet Union and Russia is. All right. So you may have heard them interchangeably. Here's what that means. So Russia is the country of Russia. This is where Joseph Stalin is at. He is the communist dictator of Russia. All right. Russia then takes over all these other countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine. All these countries get taken over by Russia. However, they are still their own country, in large part because everybody's in the United Nations and everybody gets a vote in the United Nations. So Russia would like for these countries to remain in the United Nations, and then he basically gets more votes. That's one of the logics. Doesn't always work out that way, but so he allows these countries to continue to exist, even though 100% they're being owned and controlled by Russia. So they are called satellite nations, all right? Which means like distance is satellite. So they are satellite nations of Russia. So you go into Ukraine, it's going to be just like being in Russia, all right? So here's where the term the Soviet Union comes from. Russia, plus all the stuff that they own, is collectively referred to as the Soviet Union. All right. So when we talk about the Soviet Union, we're talking about all of this. All right. And everything that Russia owns, though Russia still controls it. When we say Russia or we say Soviet Union, pretty much, if we're just talking about ideology and stuff, we can use those interchangeably. Now, here's what's important to understand. Can the Soviet Union collapse, yet Russia still exists? Absolutely. Because the Soviet Union is just all the stuff Russia owns plus Russia. So if they all stop being owned by Russia, Russia would still exist. If Russia ceased to exist, would the Soviet Union exist? No. But Russia isn't going to cease to exist. Russia is still Russia today. So that's the difference in the Soviet Union and Russia. So Soviet Union, Russia, plus everything that they own. All right. So the satellite nations here are things that are owned by Russia. It gets kind of squirrely. This is a really good map right here. I really like it. There is something called the Iron Curtain that we're going to get to here in just a moment, but this is a good map. You know what? I'm going to use blue for this. So right here with this blue line, this is the border. All right, don't worry about Albania. That's a whole separate story I don't have time to go into. So that blue line, all right, nothing, and I mean nothing, crosses that blue line. Not that way, not that way. Nothing at all. There's no telephone lines that cross it. There's no mail that crosses it. There's no airplanes that cross it. All right, there's no satellite. If you have, and I'll use yellow here now, if you have family that lives in Belarus and you live in France, once Russia takes it over, you never have contact with them again. Like, it's serious. So it's nicknamed the Iron Curtain. All right. Winston Churchill came up with the name. Winston Churchill, he's not in power anymore, but he's still giving speeches, and he nicknames this the Iron Curtain because it's like an iron curtain. Like you go to the border. There's not a wall here at this blue line. Right, let me back up a little bit so I don't have so much junk on this. There is no wall here where this blue line is. All right. We're going to talk about the Berlin Wall, and we'll start talking about that here soon. But what takes place here is if you tried to go on a road there, you'd get there and there'd be like 5 soldiers and some tanks and stuff like that, and nobody's going to be getting across it. So this is called the Iron Curtain. And it is symbolic of the solid separation between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world. The Soviet Union does this. They have no contact with the outside world, and there ends up being this battle of ideology between the United States, who's trying to force democracy on everybody, and Russia, who's trying to force communism on everybody. Let's not get it twisted. America and Russia, after World War II, are both trying to take the world over. 100%. Here's the logic, though, that's different. Russia wants to take over a country, and then they own them, and they can control them. America's mentality is if we can aggressively make sure a country turns into a democracy, who's king democracy? America. They will be our friends. It's like forcing them to be our friend if they become a democracy. So democracies all look up to America, generally speaking. So we both want to take over the world. So there's all these poor countries, all right? And I'm just going to circle this area right here. This is going to be the battle central. All these poor countries that are completely devastated after World War II, they need help. Who are they going to take help from? Russia or America? And America aggressively wants to go in here and help out these countries. Once they become, like on this graph here, once it becomes communist, you're not getting them back. But like Austria, which is right here, and Slovakia, and Bosnia, and Serbia, and Croatia, those countries, America is going to be very aggressive in trying to prevent them from becoming communist. All right? So satellite nations help Russia grow and become more communist. This is another picture of it here of Russia just in the red of what they're taking over. All right, containment. So here's what containment means. All right. Let me go back to this map. That's a good job, Self. I like this map. So here's what containment means. These countries here, I'll use blue again. Let's say Poland. Once Russia takes over Poland, also let me back up. There's a huge part of the story I'm forgetting to tell you. We have nukes in America. By 1949, so does Russia. Russia develops them a lot quicker than we thought they were going to, but Russia gets nukes too. Once we get nukes, we make thousands of them. All right, we have enough weapons to completely wipe both countries and the Earth from existence like 1,000 times over. Hooray, humans! All right, so we both have these ridiculous weapons, and we have thousands and thousands. We have enough of them to wipe out all of humanity multiple times over. All right, and we from the beginning are going to start threatening to use them on each other. So tensions between these two mega powers that hate each other, Russia and America, one's communist, one's a democracy, and we both have nukes, and we're both like threatening to use them on each other, which means everybody on Earth is going to get killed if we use them. It leads to a new level of tension here after World War II that has not previously existed. So the concept here of containment. Once Poland becomes communist, we can't like go invade Poland and make them a democracy. Because once they become communist, if we invaded them, all right, who's going to get squirrely about that? That's going to be Russia. So if Russia comes over and starts a war with the people that are invading Poland, it leads to World War III, everybody gets nuked, and everybody dies. So we realize once a country actually becomes communist, we can't do anything about it. Otherwise, we're going to start World War III, and we all die, which we don't want. So what our thought process is containment. And that is like the Iron Curtain is what we talked about, all right? The Iron Curtain, all right, is the border of the Soviet Union. So it's like a blob trying to move over. Our goal is no matter what, whether I'm doing a squiggly blue line at, communism cannot spread there. We can't stop it where it already is, but we can do everything in our power to prevent it from spreading anymore, and that's what containment is. So we will aggressively keep Slovakia, Austria, and these other countries from becoming communist because we can't actually stop it where it already is, or World War III, we all die. So the Iron Curtain is the nickname given to the solid separation as the Soviet Union spreads out, because nothing goes in or out. They cut off all communication, and it's kind of creepy. So it's containment, and then the Iron Curtain is the term we give to the actual border. There's no actual wall there. All right. What happens if you try to get to the border is there's guys with tanks and soldiers there, and they'll shoot you. Like, what if you tried to sneak across? Wasn't really a thing. They made sure that if there's a place that needed a wall, there would be a wall, but generally speaking, there wasn't. All right, got a video clip here.
During World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies. But after the war, the Communist Soviets and Democratic Americans had become enemies. Each side attempted to be the world's top superpower. The two nations sought to dominate in space, in military power, and in the allied countries they could lead. Their conflict is known as the Cold War. After World War II, the Soviets quickly took control of many Eastern European countries and enforced communist rule in them. Britain's Prime Minister Winston Churchill referred to the Iron Curtain that separated the free countries in the West from the communist countries in the East.
So this is just a cartoon, and the Iron Curtain is what the border was called. But again, there's no actual wall with the Iron Curtain. If you're thinking about wall and communism, if that's ringing any bells, if it's not, it's fine because we haven't talked about it. That's a thing called the Berlin Wall, and we're going to mention that here soon. All right. So this time period is referred to collectively as the Cold War. The reason it's called the Cold War is because there's no actual fighting taking place. It's kind of interesting. So we go back in history and we refer to this as the Cold War. Tensions get so high between America and Russia, it becomes like obvious we're going to fight. So this entire time period feels like a build-up to World War III. Like, nobody can see a way that a World War III isn't going to happen. So everybody feels like this is just the stuff that happens leading up to World War III. Spoiler alert, World War III ends up not happening. And I imagine if you're like into sci-fi movies and there's like all these different versions of reality, like, and there's 1,000 different versions, it really feels to me like we're in like the one of the 1,000 versions in which World War III doesn't happen, because it seems like a foregone conclusion. We're like the two big bullies at school in the lunchroom, chest bumping each other, screaming, "Hit me, you hit me." Like, surely a fight's going to happen. This is how it feels to the rest of the world. The rest of the world is terrified because we all have nukes and we can just wipe out the entire world population. So the Cold War is what we call this time period when we look back on it in history, because it never actually happened, but the tension was real. The decisions got made as if this was going to happen at any given moment, because it wasn't a question of will this happen? It was when is it going to happen? And it's really shocking to realize now that it doesn't, because anybody at the time was just waiting for this to blow up at any given time. But this whole time period is called the Cold War. There was no active fighting between Russia and America, and it seems baffling with as close as we got. Lots of different shows of strength, a lot of like chest bumping and talking trash and messing with other third world countries and like aggressively like doing all types of shady stuff. But as far as our two militaries actually attacking each other, it doesn't happen. And it is surprising given the nature of what's taking place here and what will continue to build. So this is just Stalin trying to spread out here in Europe. And this is an American belief that the civilized world has just been destroyed with communism and everything here at the Cold War. All right, so the Truman Doctrine. They like to reference one or two of these each year, but you need to understand what the difference is between the Truman Doctrine and what we're getting ready to talk about with the Marshall Plan. So this is a picture of Truman, sign of the Truman Doctrine. Harry S. Truman is the president of the United States. All right, he's going to pass the Truman Doctrine. So he says, we'll use Austria as an example. If you remember from the map, Austria was just on the side of the Iron Curtain. Russia would really want Austria to become part of become a satellite nation. Then he can move that Iron Curtain over. All right, and he would gain more power. America does not want that to happen. The Truman Doctrine says, for any means necessary at all, for any reason, can't let that happen. Truman Doctrine means any means necessary. We cannot let Austria or any country become communist. Anything is on the table. You can be as extreme as possible. Can't let that country become communist. So how could you do that? You could get them to like you. Sure. You could go in there and take them over and aggressively make them a democracy. That would work. You could nuke the entire country and make it the lake formerly known as Austria. And under the Truman Doctrine, that is acceptable. Anything is on the table with the Truman Doctrine. So the Truman Doctrine means anything goes to keep a country from becoming communist. Because once they're communist, then if you attack them, then it's World War III. You can do anything that you want. You can use to keep a country from becoming communist. That's the Truman Doctrine. Now, the Marshall Plan, all right, is very famous. So, again, anything goes under the Truman Doctrine. However, the Marshall Plan is part of the Truman Doctrine, since the Truman Doctrine is anything goes. The Marshall Plan is so effective, this is really the only part of the Truman Doctrine we ever need to use. So Marshall, George Marshall, he was the head general for America during World War II. He was the one that stayed in America. He had Eisenhower on one side and MacArthur on the other. He did such a good job in World War II, he gets promoted after the World War II, and he becomes the Secretary of State, which is the second most powerful person in America, all right, behind the president. He is like, hey, I got an idea. He goes, all these countries, the reason they like communism is because they're all on fire and they're all destroyed, and communism promises to come in and give them structure and everything back. He's like, what if we just go to these countries that are susceptible to becoming communist because they need to put their country back together, and that's what communism offers, is structure. What if we just throw a bunch of money at them and promise to rebuild their country if they just promise to be a democracy? And they're like, you think it'll work? Let's try it. Works perfectly every single time. We never have to nuke a country. We never have to destroy a country to keep it from becoming communist in Europe. All we do is we just throw money at them. We're a lot richer than Russia is, and we can just chuck money at them. Countries, this usually doesn't work out for America because people feel disrespected when we just throw money at them because we want something in return. But after World War II, they needed to rebuild, and the Marshall Plan is incredibly effective. So, when you hear the Truman Doctrine, that means anything goes to keep a country from becoming communist. However, the Marshall Plan is a part of the Truman Doctrine. It's the only part of the Truman Doctrine that we ever really use, and you need to associate it with money. And here's how you can remember it. See that? So it says the Marshall Plan here. I'm going to underline it. Marshall Plan. Here's how I always remember it. The Marshall, that little S is a cash. It's an awful cash sign because it's not big enough. But it's the Marshall Plan. And the cash sign basically helps me remember this is just us throwing money at countries, and it's very effective. Keeps any country that's thinking about becoming communist from becoming a democracy. Works great for us. Russia hates it. Russia is so furious by it because they can't just throw money at people, but we can because we're capitalists. Yeah, woo, money, get some. And the Marshall Plan is extremely effective in the United States at preventing the spread of communism. Got a little video here on that.
Britain's Prime Minister Winston Churchill referred to the Iron Curtain that separated the free countries in the West from the communist countries in the East. President Harry Truman agreed that communism was a threat to the world. He proposed the Truman Doctrine, the policy of opposing the spread of communism. Secretary of State George C. Marshall proposed a plan to help carry out that doctrine. The Marshall Plan offered aid to European countries that were rebuilding after World War II.
So we give money to any country that needs it to help them rebuild, and they like us for it. This is This picture was taken 8 years apart, all right, in Prague, which it shows you what the Marshall Plan does. It's taken from the same hilltop, same location, same picture. This is 1947, 2 years after World War II. Everything is just absolutely destroyed. 8 years later, brand spanking new, and America paid for every bit of it. All right. They like America. It's a very, very effective way of getting things done. Is just throwing money at them. At this point with the Marshall Plan, very effective, and it really ticks off Germany. All right. The Berlin Airlift. We came so crazy close to dying. I mean, it's insane. So this is very shortly after World War II that the first real mega tensions here happen with America and Germany. All right. So I'm going to go back there. I'm going to draw some stuff here because it's the simplest way of doing it. All right, to get you to understand the tensions and what happens. So, the Berlin Airlift happens in Berlin. Let's start with that. All right, so I want this here. This here is Germany. That's the country of Germany. Looks just like it. All right. So, at the end of World War II, America and Russia had both invaded Germany. So we had come in from this side to get to Hitler, and Stalin had come in from this side at Hitler, and we had met in the middle. All right. So immediately after the war, the argument is who gets to control Germany. I mean, they just had the Nazi Party, like the idea that they could like rule themselves. Like, nah, they're going to be owned by somebody. So Russia and America argue over who gets to control Germany. All right. So we squabble, but we come up with an agreement. All right. When we were still talking at Yalta and Potsdam. So what the agreement is we're just going to divide it in half. All right. This actually works pretty well for Germany or for Russia because up here, this is already part of the Soviet Union, and down here is. So dividing it in half creates, just extends the Iron Curtain all the way through Germany. All right. With me so far? So since you divided this country in half, you actually have two separate countries here, and I'll do it in yellow. Two separate countries. You have East Germany, and you have West Germany. Everybody good so far? It's two brand new countries with their own governments. So West Germany is a democracy. Oh, let me fix that. West Germany is a democracy. East Germany, controlled by Russia, is going to be communist. Everybody good so far? All right. So everybody's in agreement on this. America, Russia, everybody's good with this so far. All right. So you're like, well, how is this going to lead to a whole bunch of tensions? Well, there's one more issue here, a major one that we have to discuss between America and Russia. So whoever controls Berlin, which is the capital of Germany, whoever controls Berlin basically controls the whole country because it is their industrial center. They don't have it spread out in different cities throughout. Their industrial center is Berlin. So whoever gets control of Berlin basically gets gets basically all the good stuff of Germany. So we both want to control Berlin. Well, we decided to compromise logically. Since they cut the country in half, guess what they're going to do with Berlin? That's right. They're going to cut Berlin in half. Here's the problem, though. It's not really a problem at first, but here's the major issue. Berlin is not in the middle of Germany, all right, of old Germany. Berlin is smack down, I'm going to do it in blue here, is smack dab here in the middle of East Germany. But we're going to divide it in half, and Russia agrees with this. So we're going to divide it in half. I'm going to use red for my dividing line. It's going to be divided in half, And I'll use yellow to label it. So you have East Berlin, which is controlled by Russia. And then you have West Berlin, which is controlled. Oh man, my writing's really bad there. Sorry, trying to write small with this. You have West Berlin, which is completely controlled by America and the Allies. They say Allies, it's America. All right. Now, this is what's really, really important about this. This line, the Iron Curtain, and I'm going to make it stronger here. This is the Iron Curtain. Nothing goes in or out at any point. This is the Iron Curtain. It cuts through Germany, but it cuts through anything that's above or below it. All right. That's the Iron Curtain. Nobody has any idea what goes on in the Soviet Union. All right. Yeah, you can like tune into their radio programs and everything, but everything's run by the state. So you don't actually have any idea what's going on in there. But now America we have, and I'm going to circle it here. Let me circle it in yellow. West Berlin is half a city inside Germany or inside the Soviet Union that America has access to. All right. Now, here's how we get there. So West Berlin, all right, we own half a city there. There's not enough stuff for West Berlin to be self-sufficient. It's half a city inside the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union just completely ignores West Berlin. So what happens, and I'll do it in blue here, is that America and the Allies are allowed every day to come in across on a highway, across on the Autobahn, with transfer trucks to go in and supply West Berlin. We're allowed to do this every single day. All right. So here's what I should do before I start messing up this picture too much more. I'm going to wipe it off and then simplify more with Berlin. So every single day we're able we're allowed to take transfer trucks in and supply West Berlin in the 1940s. All right. So let me go and kind of zoom in on this. And so this here is going to be the Iron Curtain. That's the Iron Curtain. Let me make Berlin. This is so. Let me label stuff effectively. This over here where I am, this is going to be West Germany. Remember, this is what we own. This over here is going to be East Germany, which is owned by Russia and the Soviet Union. Boop. This here is Berlin divided in half. You got East Berlin, and I'm just going to say EB for East Berlin, and then West Berlin is WB for West Berlin. We own West Berlin. We are allowed to come across every day on a highway and supply West Berlin. Soviet Union allows it. It's like the only thing that's allowed in. Now, not only is it cool that we have like half a city inside the Soviet Union, it's like the only thing inside the Soviet Union that we can go in and look at. We don't really get any cool information about it because what happens is when we show up and we look around, we're just seeing state-run stuff. Like we don't get any cool information about what's happening in the Soviet Union by being in the West Berlin. But everybody in the Soviet Union is real interested in what happens in West Berlin because they're told this democracy is the super evil thing. Oh my gosh, what happens? So here's what America does in West Berlin in the 1940s. All right. So we start giving West Berlin everything that you could possibly imagine. Everybody gets a 90-inch TV and a brand new Xbox and a PlayStation 7. Like they just give them. We literally ship in so much food it would be impossible for the people in West Berlin to eat it. And so a lot of it rots and has to be thrown out. Remember, Soviet Union always kind of struggles making sure they have enough food. We literally ship in like 3 times as much food as West Berlin needs, purposely to make sure that it rots and we have to throw it out. So all the other people in the Soviet Union can see, if you're in a democracy, look how much stuff you have. All right. It's absolutely ridiculous how much stuff we pump into West Berlin just to make the people in the Soviet Union jealous and give them kind of a false sense of how much stuff is in West Berlin. So Stalin's not a big fan of this because what ends up happening is there are people, I guess I'll do this in blue. There are people from East Berlin over here that start coming over to West Berlin. I mean, if you're in East Berlin, you live in the Soviet society, I'm just going to go to West Berlin and have a whole bunch of other stuff. Stalin gets really angry about this because it makes him look bad that people are leaving the communist side of the city and going to the democracy side. So what happens one day, and this is when tensions get crazy, is we show up, and I'm in blue down here again, if you see me down here, all right? As we show up to cross this border one day, it's closed. Stalin has just closed the border. Nope, you can't supply West Berlin anymore. Because what Stalin wants to do is keep us from supplying West Berlin, so West Berlin starts to starve to death. That way, Stalin can point to his own people like, look, they can't even keep half a city alive. How would they do with anything else? Communism is better. Well, we know he's doing this, and we know that he's purposely shutting off West Berlin so that they will starve to death. So we try to communicate with him, and he refuses to respond. And we're like, dude, you're not going to keep us from supplying West Berlin. And he refuses to respond. So at this border, where this is at, they have a whole bunch of tanks and stuff. So if you try to like just run it, you're going to like blow up. And any type of tension here can lead to World War III, which we all die. So very, very, very touchy situation. What America decides to do, and it's going to be called the Berlin Airlift, and it is terrifying to the rest of the world. So, not surprisingly, this big red line here, that's the Iron Curtain, it's a no-fly zone. You can't fly an airplane over it. If you fly an airplane over it, you're basically violating their agreements, and it's basically an act of war to fly over it. So, nobody can fly over this. We tell them, we need to supply West Berlin. So we're sending him message after message. We don't know if he's getting it or not because they won't communicate. They won't respond. And we say, look, we're going to deliver food to West Berlin. The only way that we can do that is to fly airplanes over since you won't let us use your roads. We're going to fly airplanes over this border, over the Iron Curtain, into West Berlin. So I'll do it in yellow here. You can come over here and into West Berlin. Direct flight. We're going to land there, we're going to unload all our stuff, and we're going to fly right back. We're going to do it nonstop all day, every day, because that you won't let our transfer trucks in. We have to take our big airplanes, all right? Stalin doesn't respond. So this is really touchy. The whole world is terrified because we're going to do it. We're going to fly these airplanes over filled with food to supply West Berlin. Are we breaking the rules here as we cross that in an airplane? 100%. Do they have the right to shoot down one of our planes if we fly over? Absolutely. However, we tell them if you open fire, even if you miss, if you open fire at one of our planes, we declare war on you. Which means World War III, we all die. All right? And it is terrifying. Now, it's also, he's breaking the law by not allowing us to come over like he promised he would. So we're in a real and the whole world's like, oh no, oh no, oh no. And this is like just a couple years after World War II ended. Like, this is crazy. So everybody is terrified. Here's what makes it even more touchy. So we have to like immediately do this. Like, we can't wait a week or so. We have to do it like now. All right. So we let them know. We have to fly these planes. The only planes that we have in mass quantities that can carry a whole bunch of stuff are World War II bombers. So that's what's going to be delivering the food is massive hordes of World War II bombers flying over this border. And so he has, I'll put little dashes here. He has these anti-aircraft guns here. I'm sure we have them on the same side. When all these bombers come flying over one day, I mean, they would automatically shoot them down. But we have to use them. If they shoot them down, since we've already told them they're just carrying food, we're going to declare war on them. Man, the morning these planes take off, and it's called the Berlin Airlift, the whole world is like, oh my gosh, 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 oh my gosh. Like, what is going to happen? They fly over, all these anti-aircraft guns track us as we go all the way over, and they don't fire on our way over. And we unload all the food, and we're like, I bet that jerk's going to shoot us coming back, knowing that we're empty. So we were able to, like, kind of make it in a weird area. We fly back over, they track us, and they don't fire. And we're like, okay. So we try to communicate with him. He doesn't say anything. We have to do it again, and then again, and then again. And then again, we do this for almost a year. All right. Every single day. And like at any given moment, one guy's having a bad day on one of these anti-aircraft guns, starts World War III, and then everybody nukes each other and everybody dies. Super, super tense. All of a sudden, what ends up happening, and I'll do it in yellow, down here where that road was closed, all of a sudden, I'm just going to circle it down here. Stalin opens that road back up. He opens the road back up, and we're like, so he's never talked to us. And we're like, all right. Cool. So we start using the road again, and it's like it never got talked about. It's like it never got mentioned. All right. So we're like, okay, so we dodged that bullet. So Stalin, he clearly looks like he lost this. I mean, because he did. He bowed up and then he backed down. So he's really angry about it. So what he does not want to do, his whole issue here, I'll use yellow again here at East Berlin. He doesn't want people coming over from East Berlin into West Berlin. All right, he doesn't want that to happen. So when he opens up the road, he then does something else. This is what he does in East Berlin. He's going to build a wall in East Berlin. All right, and it's called the Berlin Wall to prevent people from East Berlin from going to West Berlin. Now, everybody's always like, well, can't you just like go around the wall? Duh. All right, so the Berlin Wall goes all the way around West Berlin. All right. So the only way to get in there is like through these checkpoints, which they allow us in. So we can supply them, but nobody else can get in. You may have heard of the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall becomes incredibly famous. The reason it becomes incredibly famous is because America makes it incredibly famous. Because technically, this is all in the Soviet Union. Like, it's all in Soviet Union territory is the Berlin Wall. However, we talk about the Berlin Wall all the time throughout the rest of the 1900s because what we say is, hey, you see they had to build a wall to keep the communists from coming to a democracy? There's nowhere on earth that America has to build a wall to keep people in a democracy from going to a communist country. So clearly, who's better? America, because we don't have to build a wall to keep people in like Russia does. So we talk about the Berlin Wall all the time, and the Berlin Wall ends up becoming very, very, very famous. All right. So, but the Berlin Airlift really got everybody really squirrely. We came real close to all dying. Had a shot been fired, is World War III, and it's terrifying. Got a picture, video here.
On June the 30th, 1948, the Allied powers began a massive airlift into the city of Berlin. It was their answer to a road and rail blockade set up by the Soviet Union 2 months earlier, and it shook the world by its daring and effectiveness. As part of the post-war settlement, the former German capital had been divided into 4 sections. The British, Americans, and French were in the western areas. The Soviets occupied the east. But Berlin itself was inside Soviet-occupied territory, which meant that all food supplies and any other kind of material needed to keep life going had to pass through their checkpoints before it could reach the Allied zones. The blockade was an effort to drive the West out of the city. The airlift was to make sure it could survive. And it worked. For weeks, workers at the airport had to handle thousands of tons of supplies which were flown into the British sector every day by planes landing every 4 minutes. As the American Secretary of State George Marshall put it, "We are in Berlin to stay. The city will be kept alive." To underline the point, in one 24-hour period, American planes delivered 7,000 tons of supplies on 895 flights. In the end, with the shops still full despite all the Soviet efforts to empty them, Moscow backed down. In a deal arranged at the United Nations, 2 Germanys were established. The German Democratic Republic was set up in the east, the Federal German Republic in the west. Berlin itself would remain divided.
All right, so this is a picture of Stalin and Truman like playing chess. Is how it felt. It's like who can do what for who. And trying to get the advantage over the other side. Because both of these guys are trying to take over the world just in their own way. All right. This leads to something, one of the last things here that's really important to talk about is NATO. All right, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So after the Berlin Airlift, we realize that this is a problem with with Russia. If we go to war with Russia, the United Nations is useless because we are both on the UN Security Council. So therefore, there's no unanimous decision. Nobody's got anybody's back. It's like your two parents getting in a fight. Whose side do you take? So America has to create our own little gang inside the United Nations. And let me draw that for you right here. So every country on Earth is inside the United Nations. Every country on Earth is in the United Nations. All right. However, America, we are going to create our own little group inside the United Nations. It's like us and our boys, like England, France, Canada. And we call it the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I just realized I have misspelled this up here. Gee, that's silly. But it's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that goes by NATO. Still around today. It's America and our boys. So if Russia gets squirrely, all right, and we have to fight them, the United Nations isn't going to be any help. But NATO is our boys. They got our back. It's like our little gang inside the United Nations. So Russia, all right, will eventually create their own version of this called the Warsaw Pact, which is Russia plus all of their boys, which is weird because it's pretty much just the Soviet Union. I don't know why they don't just say Soviet Union. So inside the United Nations, you have NATO and the Warsaw Pact, and these two groups do not like each other. So while everybody in the world is in the United Nations, there's NATO and the Warsaw Pact. There's a lot of countries that aren't in either NATO or the Warsaw Pact, but they are in the United Nations, like Zimbabwe. They're like, why do you guys keep wanting to kill each other? But NATO comes out after the Berlin Airlift, and we realize, man, when this thing goes sideways, which everybody's convinced it will, we got to have some help here. Boop. So NATO, 12 countries became members. It's still around today. It has grown. It's our gang inside the United Nations. All 12 countries agree to support each other. This is the NATO countries. This is who's in it today. But this is a more modern picture. This is 2003, 2004. And that's who's in it today.